All right, guys, welcome back to Wild Outdoor Living. Today, we're going to be talking about the exciting news of the 2021 Trek Slash update. This is a bike we've been waiting for actually a really long time. So the bike originally came out in 2016, 2017, and hasn't had an update since. Meanwhile, a lot of things have changed in the enduro race bike category and the big trail bike category. Call it enduro, call it a mountain, call it whatever you want. But a lot of changes have been made to mountain bikes in that time. And the Slash has pretty much just sat there. The Remedy's gotten an update. The Fuel EX has gotten a really pretty modern update last year, actually for 2020. And so, we were really expecting the Slash to finally get an update. And it took a really long time, but it's finally here. So I work at a shop that deals Trek, and we actually have been able to get our hands on a couple of these. So I've been able to get on the bike, test it out in the parking lot, test it in the shop, just see how it fits, and get kind of some overall first impressions of it. So this won't be a full review by any means, but this will be a good first look, and it's a bike I'm pretty excited about. So let's jump into it. So these are some photos of the Trek Slash 9.8. The bike we have in the shop is the Trek Slash 8, so the aluminum version. So you'll see that here at the second half of the review. But the changes that they've made to the frame, the first thing you'll notice is we bumped from 150, 160 travel up to 160, 170. So 160 in the rear, 170 in the front. The bike's a little bit slacker, half a degree slacker. They have lengthened the chainstays a little bit. The big thing is they've changed the reach 20 to 30 millimeters longer on a lot of the sizes. So in large, it's 486. So this is by far the biggest large I've been on. I know there's some out there that are even bigger, but the way that works is actually pretty clever. It doesn't feel like they just took a normal bike and just made it super long. They've made some clever changes so this bike still feels pretty balanced, but big changes in the reach numbers. The seat post diameter has grown to 34.9. So nice thing with that is with these 170, 200 mil dropper posts, it's just better supported. And Trek felt like they should go to a bigger diameter to accommodate that. It's gone to a threaded bottom bracket, thank goodness. So, press fit bottom brackets, we complain about them. They actually work fine most of the time, but they do require special tools to take in and out. And so for a DIY guy, this threaded bottom bracket's a lot better, as prone to less manufacturing problems and just better all around. It's, personally, I'd much rather have a threaded bottom bracket if I have the chance. Another thing that's kind of nice is the down tube protection now goes all the way up the down tube rather than just having it kind of in that bottom third. So good for shuttle runs, but also, rocks get thrown up there too, guys. That's something that companies try to ignore, but rocks definitely go higher than the first third of your down tube. So I'm really glad to see that. The other thing that a lot of people are going to praise is the knock block is basically gone. So the straight shot down tube is completely gone. The knock block is still there, but it can turn a lot further. So the benefits of knock block, keeping your cables from getting ripped out in a crash and that sort of thing, that's still there. But if you want to slap a regular stem on there, it's not going to be a problem. Your fork is not going to be able to hit your down tube anymore. So you don't have to worry about that. Changes the aesthetic of the bike just a little bit. And I like it, but I like the other look too. So, it's going to be a love or hate. The seat tube angle has increased basically by 2 degrees. So now in the low setting, it's 75.6, high setting at 76.1. And there are, of course, a lot of companies that have gone a lot steeper. This bike still feels really normal while accommodating the fact that the reach has gotten a lot longer and the head tube angle has gotten a lot slacker. And so the effective seat tube angle on this bike is actually not long at all. And so it feels really normal in a seated position. That's, like I say, one of the first things I noticed was that when you sit on this bike, you feel really deep in the bike and the bars feel like they're in a really natural position. They don't feel too low. It's actually a really comfortable, it feels like you could pedal the bike all day. Just a really comfortable seated position. That's the first thing I noticed hopping on it, is the stack's really high and that reach is just set up really well. It's not like they just took a Fuel EX and just lengthened it out there. Other cool thing on this bike is that the shock is a 3-position Super Deluxe Ultimate from RockShox. So normal Super Deluxe Ultimate has 2 positions. This one has a lockout and fully open, as well as 3 positions on the dial there for more or less progressivity. And it is a through shaft shock. So that's the only thing that is kind of proprietary on it, but you can run a bunch of different shocks on this frame. So it's really up to you if you want to swap that out. But it's not a reactive shock at all. So a lot of adjustability. It'd be nice to compare them back to back, but this frame actually doesn't fit a normal Super Deluxe Ultimate because of where the levers are located, but it does fit a bunch of other shocks. So you do have upgraded options, and there's a bunch of tunability, of course, too. So there's a couple other things to note, but what I really wanted to test, and this is my buddy here riding it around the shop, you'll see me in a second, but what we really wanted to test was, this bike is big, it's very calm, it's obviously going to be very stable, but how is it in terms of, its nimbleness? And that was the one thing we could really test in the shop. So riding it into the kind of the tightest places we could, just getting into tight spaces. This is a place that we test a lot of other bikes, and actually the Slash is really good. So it's very easy to balance. It's actually pretty easy to track stand on this bike. Bars come super wide. There's a couple of things I would change for myself, but it's honestly, because that knock block is gone and because the fit feels so neutral, it's really easy weaving it in and out of tight spots. The Fuel EX feels a little bit snappier in this situation. Obviously, it's a much smaller trail bike. But honestly, the Slash is really, really good. And that's the one thing I would worry about on a bike that's grown this much. It's got this much travel, how easy is it to get around? And honestly, it's just as easy to get around as the Fuel EX. It feels a little bit different, but I think with some setup changes, it could actually feel pretty close. So what Trek is looking for in this bike is for it to be a full enduro race shredder, be the absolute best enduro race bike they can have. But of course they know that most of us, we don't ride enduro races all the time, or at least most of us don't. But here in Idaho, a lot of our trails are super burly. They're high alpine. They can be really fatiguing on a bike that's not as plush as some of these big enduro bikes are. So it's handy to have that much travel, but we don't want it to feel like a pig. The Slash does not feel like a pig. And so I think they kind of hit the nail on the head, at least from the nimbleness standpoint. So I'm really interested to see how other riders feel when they get their hands on this thing for full testing. And I'm really interested for myself. I'd like to get my hands on one as soon as I can. Compared to a carbon Fuel EX, obviously the Fuel EX is quite a bit lighter. The aluminum one, I think, weighs 34 pounds that we weighed. And so it's not super light, but it's a really good value. Spec'd really well. It's really got everything you need, that Slash 8 does. And there's also a Slash 7. So there's a bike kind of for every price point. The carbon models and the aluminum models have down tube storage, which has been really handy. I've really liked that on my Fuel. It's not the end of the world if it didn't have it, but it's nice to see it on all the models. We thought we were going to be able to have that in carbon models. So really nice to see it there. So yeah, the bike, I would say there's going to be a lot of people who are going to want to drop the bars and cut the bars down. But it is really nice that if you want to run 820 bars and you want your stack to be just really, really high, you have the option on the Slash to do that. There is still a kink in the seat tube. There is a bit of a kink in the top tube as well because they got rid of the knock block. But the seat tube has a bit of a kink in it. And that's something people complained about with binding dropper posts and some issues there on the previous model. But it hasn't been an issue so far because that seat post is at an effective angle of 75.6. So it's already steeper than any full suspension bike Trek has ever made. And so even though it looks like it does have a big kink, it doesn't really. So yeah, something to keep in mind. A couple things to note. So you can run 220 rotors on both ends of this thing. It's the mount for it is, I think, a 180 on the back is the lowest you can run. And then the biggest one you can run is a 220. It is listed for being able to run coil shocks. And the shock actually it's on is pretty cool. Basically the lockout position on that shock is really firm. So for climbing, that's going to be really good. I love pedaling it around that position, but I felt really comfortable pedaling in the open position as well. But in the open position, you have the option of centered, so basically a neutral kind of progressiveness, and then you have plus, and then you have minus, which is a bit more linear. I don't have good details on exactly how that works, but it is noticeable. So much better pedaling platform on that plus setting. and just overall felt a little bit more solid. Feels very plush, feels very calm. It corners like a Trek, which is something we really love. It corners a bit slower than the Fuel. The Fuel is a bit poppier in the corners, but overall, it actually does really well. This bike feels really, really smooth, really plush. And so I think it's one that you're going to like. If you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. And until then, we'll catch you later.